I've always believed that the real measure of celebrity success was not just how famous he becomes.
It began with a hush, a final confession at 81 that rippled through decades of speculation and whispers. Diana Ross, the Motown icon, spoke with a weight that only the passage of years can bring. That revelation, it was built not on dramatics, but on the simple power of long-held truth finally released. And with it came shock, clarity, and a recentering of narratives that had long cast Michael Jackson in ambiguous light. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. The relationship between Diana Ross and Michael Jackson was never ordinary. From early days in the Motown orbit, the pair developed a connection deeper than stage rehearsals and chart-topping duets. Michael saw in Diana many things: a mother, a sister, and in his own words, someone he loved deeply, and all at once. She, in turn, became an unwavering fixture in his life, offering guidance, presence, and a stabilizing warmth in a world that moved at a relentless pace. Through the years, the industry spun stories. Was Dirty Diana about her? Was Remember the Time a tribute? Those questions rode on rumors born of interpretation, but none ever carried the weight of confession. None held the force of certainty Ross delivered in that moment. She wasn't framing Michael as an enigma anymore, but acknowledging the whole of who he was in anchor and shadow. When Diana finally spoke, it wasn't to sensationalize or to craft headlines. It was as if she was lifting a curtain. That velvet barrier, worn with time and tact, slid away. The shock wasn't just in what she said. It was in the gravity of it. A life shaped by music, fame, complex friendship, and personal adoration was now being reframed through the lens of candid recognition. For fans and historians alike, it demanded a reckoning. How do we hold affection for artistry when behind those notes lies unspoken struggle? Diana's revelation reframed Michael in human terms. Not as king or supernatural performer, but as someone who navigated loyalties, love, and loss within the confines of his own vulnerabilities. The phrase mother, sister, lover had always sounded paradoxical, artistic, surreal, until Ross's words solidified their sincerity. The bond she described wasn't tabloids fodder. It was deeply felt, complicating everything we thought we knew. The implications are vast and layered. For music historians, the confession invites reconsideration of influence. Diana wasn't just a mentor, she was emotional lifeline, molding Michael's emotional world beyond the stage. Songs that once seemed playful or allegorical now pulse with resonance. When he called her lovely, sexy, those were not promotional flourishes. They were echoes of something real. When his will named her as a potential guardian for his children should his mother not survive. What had once sounded like a bond rooted in gratitude now reads as testament to profound trust. For fans, especially those who idolized both voices as pillars of Motown and pop, Diana's truth unsettles comforting myths. It forces a confrontation with bittersweet complexity. You cannot step into her revelation without acknowledging how it reframes Michael, not in scandal or shame, but in a frame of multidimensional humanity. He exists in her words as both luminous and fragile, a figure who inspired devotion, even as his life carried burdens unseen. This confession also sits at a larger cultural crossroads. It intersects with how we frame artistry, intimacy, and secrecy. Too often the industry glosses over the personal in service of myth. Diana's revelation, years in the making, shatters that pattern. It tells us that sometimes silence itself becomes a story of protection, of loyalty, of unspoken love, and that finally speaking up doesn't dilute a legend, but deepens our understanding of it. Michael as narrative was once simple. He was magic, a spectacle, an icon. But through Diana's eyes, he becomes more. Beloved friend, perhaps overprotected by the devotion of someone who knew him beyond the spotlight. Her revelation tears open the separation between image and intimacy, reminding us that legends are born not just of performance, but of the ties that tether them to the people they loved. There is an undeniable power in silence, and an equally undeniable power in breaking it. At 81, surrounded by decades of myth and memory, Diana chose the latter, not to rewrite history, but simply to speak it. That kind of statement, plain-spoken, unembellished, long overdue, is what jolts culture. It demands we sit through the shock, lean into the complexity, and reckon with the shades it introduces to lives we thought we knew. Without aftermath, without sifting through consequences or fallout, that moment stands alone, a confession that reshapes viewership of the past. It rewrites the soundtrack of memory, not by changing what Michael did, but by altering how we relate to what he was. In that sense, the real shock wasn't in secrets revealed, it was the sudden clarity of love and the courage it took to finally say so. And so, what remains now is the resonance of that truth echoing forward. Audiences will revisit old performances with new ears. Scholars will reappraise relationship dynamics. Conversations will shift from gossip to empathy. Because when someone like Diana Ross speaks truth at last, the world listens, not just for entertainment, but for humanity. When Diana Ross chose to reveal the truth, she did so with the poise of someone who had lived through the heights and lows of multiple eras in music. It was not the impulsive revelation of a passing thought, but the measured decision of a woman who had guarded certain realities for decades. In that moment, the world was reminded of her position not only as a Motown pioneer, but also as someone who had stood beside Michael Jackson in ways the public had never fully understood. Her words were the key that unlocked a door fans had been staring at for years, unsure of whether it led to myth or reality. For those who followed both of their careers, the shock did not come simply from the nature of what she revealed, but from the fact that it was Diana who finally spoke. She had been a master of discretion for as long as anyone could remember. She had attended events, stood at memorials, smiled politely when questioned by reporters, and deflected when topics turned toward anything too personal. This discipline made her sudden openness even more striking. Her voice carried the weight of someone who had seen the inside of an extraordinary life, and her willingness to expose even a fragment of that reality was a departure from everything she had done before. The layers to her truth were more than just relational. They were historical, cultural, and deeply personal. To understand the gravity of what she expressed, it is necessary to recall that her connection to Michael began when he was a boy of extraordinary talent in the Jackson 5. She was not simply a fellow artist, she was a guiding force. Their paths were intertwined in a way few public figures experience. This was not a celebrity friendship built on mutual fame. It was a relationship forged in the crucible of Motown's demanding environment, shaped by rehearsals, tours, and a shared understanding of the pressures that come with being placed before the world as something extraordinary. By revealing what she had kept private for so long, Diana forced the public to reframe their understanding of Michael's personal life. For years, speculation had painted her as a symbol in his narrative, a muse, or even a cipher for deeper meanings in his art. Now, her honesty confirmed that their connection was far more profound than abstract inspiration. She was central to his inner life in ways that shifted the context of many of his choices, from the emotional tone of certain songs to the sense of loyalty and trust he placed in so few. The industry itself was forced to consider the magnitude of her statement. Music executives and fellow performers had long operated on the assumption that certain stories would never be told. There is a silent agreement in the entertainment world to protect the mystique of its most valuable stars. For Diana to speak meant that she was consciously breaking that unspoken pact, not for scandal but for truth. It was a reminder that legends are not untouchable statues. They are human beings whose lives are shaped by real bonds and private battles. There was also something almost cinematic in the timing of her revelation. She spoke as a figure whose own career had weathered decades of transformation in the music business, who had nothing left to prove in terms of artistry or fame. This gave her words an authenticity that could not be questioned. She had been there. She had seen what the cameras did not capture. She had heard what was said in the quiet spaces between shows and after applause had faded. Her perspective was irreplaceable because it was both personal and informed by a lifetime of shared history. Her decision to tell the truth also opened a rare window into the emotional texture of Michael's life. Many accounts of him focus on his public performances, his controversial moments, or the grandeur of his career. What Diana's words brought into focus was the intimacy that existed behind closed doors. She illuminated a side of him that was vulnerable, searching, and deeply connected to a select few people. It challenged the notion of Michael as an isolated genius and replaced it with the image of someone who sought and found deep connection in places the public never suspected. This truth also reshaped the way people interpreted the balance of power in their relationship. For years, the public assumed that Michael, as the more commercially dominant figure in later years, was the one with control in the friendship. Diana's revelation suggested otherwise, that there was an emotional reciprocity that made her just as vital to him as he was to her. This changed the conversation from one of mentorship to one of mutual reliance, revealing a partnership that transcended professional hierarchies. The cultural implications were equally significant. Both Diana Ross and Michael Jackson are more than just performers. They are cultural symbols. Their careers intersect with the civil rights movement, the evolution of black artistry in mainstream America, and the globalization of popular music. By speaking about their bond, Diana indirectly commented on how black artists of their generation supported one another in an industry that was not always welcoming. Her words hinted at a network of care and solidarity that allowed them to survive, and sometimes thrive, despite immense pressures. Her truth also served as a challenge to how we, as audiences, consume celebrity narratives. The media often reduces relationships between famous figures to speculation or entertainment. What Diana offered was the opposite, a testament to the real layered humanity beneath the public image. This contrast was jarring for a culture accustomed to sound bites and clickbait. It demanded that listeners slow down and absorb the seriousness of what she was saying, rather than treating it as fodder for gossip. In a sense, her statement was also an act of legacy preservation. She was aware that time inevitably erases nuance, and that the stories not told by those who live them will be shaped by others with less understanding. By choosing to speak, she ensured that at least one chapter of Michael's life would be remembered through the eyes of someone who genuinely knew him. This was not just a personal act, it was a historical one. The psychological dimension of her revelation cannot be ignored either. For decades, Diana had carried this truth quietly, perhaps weighing the potential consequences of sharing it. To finally let it out may have been liberating for her, but it also meant reopening wounds, confronting memories, and reliving moments that may have been both beautiful and painful. Speaking it aloud was an act of courage, particularly for someone of her stature, who had always understood the cost of being vulnerable in the public eye. The moment also revealed something about the dynamics of truth itself in the world of celebrity. In many cases, revelations come in the form of unauthorized biographies, leaked recordings, or secondhand accounts. Here, the truth came directly from the source. There was no intermediary, no sensational framing. It was simply Diana speaking in her own voice. This purity of delivery is rare, and it amplified the impact of her words. What struck many observers was how her revelations subtly redefined the idea of loyalty. For decades, her silence had been seen as a sign of devotion to Michael. Yet in telling the truth now, she demonstrated that loyalty can also mean ensuring that the full scope of a person's humanity is acknowledged. It was as if she believed that the highest form of respect was not to protect an image, but to honor the reality of who he was. This reality, once spoken, became impossible to unhear. Listeners found themselves reevaluating everything they thought they knew about Michael's art and life. A love song might suddenly feel like a confession. A public gesture of friendship might take on deeper significance. Diana's words became a lens through which the past was reinterpreted. Her timing also underscored the inevitability of truth. So many aspects of celebrity culture rely on secrecy and the hope that certain stories will fade with time. But Diana's choice proved that truth has a way of surfacing when it is ready, and that sometimes the right voice emerges at the right time to carry it forward. In doing so, she gave a kind of permission for other untold stories to be shared. The emotional ripple of her statement spread quickly, not because it was scandalous, but because it was intimate. It reminded people that the bonds between artists can be as complex, as deep, and as life-altering as any relationship outside the public eye. It broke through the cynicism that often surrounds celebrity interactions and replaced it with something far more real. For those who had always admired Diana for her elegance and control, the revelation added a new layer to her public image. She was still the poised diva, but now she was also a truth-teller. Someone willing to disrupt decades of narrative in order to honor the depth of a relationship. It was a reminder that grace and honesty are not opposites, but can coexist in powerful ways. From a storytelling perspective, her words also shifted the mythology of Michael Jackson. Every legend has its defining moments, and for Michael, many of those were tied to his artistry, his controversies, and his public performances. Now, one of those defining moments came not from him, but from someone who loved him enough to share what the world had never been told. It became part of his legacy in a way he might never have anticipated, but perhaps would have appreciated. What made the moment unforgettable was the sense that Diana had carried this truth not out of fear, but out of care. She had waited until the world could receive it without turning it into something ugly. That patience gave her words an air of intentionality, as if they had been waiting for just the right moment to be spoken. The implications of her statement will continue to unfold in the years to come. Scholars will analyze it for what it reveals about the music industry. Biographers will integrate it into the narrative of Michael's life, and fans will revisit their understanding of the songs, the performances, and the man behind them. It is the kind of truth that does not simply fill in a gap, it changes the shape of the whole story. Diana Ross's revelation marked a decisive shift in how the intersection of public image and private reality is understood. For decades, Michael Jackson's narrative had been constructed like an intricate tapestry, woven from interviews, media speculation, and the carefully managed statements of those around him. His artistry was placed at the forefront, his personal life kept shrouded in mystique, both by his own choice and the unwavering silence of his inner circle. When Diana spoke, she disrupted that delicate equilibrium, not by tearing it apart recklessly, but by inserting a missing thread that gave the entire picture new dimension. Part of the astonishment stemmed from the sheer improbability of the moment. It is rare for a figure as seasoned as Diana to allow the world into a space she has guarded with almost ceremonial diligence. Her career had been defined not only by music, but by a deliberate maintenance of privacy. This was not someone known for unguarded disclosures or impulsive emotional confessions. That was why, when she chose to step forward with her truth, it resonated as an event of remarkable gravity. The choice to break silence was itself an announcement, one that signaled her awareness that some truths, however uncomfortable or complex, deserve daylight before they are lost to time. The magnitude of this moment deepened when considering the historical context of their bond. Michael's rise to superstardom was meteoric, but it was not without careful guidance, and Diana was an early architect of his trajectory. She had been instrumental in presenting the Jackson 5 to the public, embodying both a professional endorsement and a personal investment in their success. Over the years, she became one of the few constants in a life defined by relentless change. That consistency, rare in the unstable world of entertainment, gave her words unmatched credibility. She had been there in the formative years, through the peaks, and into the quieter, more guarded chapters. Her account also reoriented the way people understood Michael's sense of trust. For an individual who often appeared surrounded by admirers and collaborators, the truth was that his circle of genuine confidants was small and fiercely protected. Diana's decision to speak about their connection underscored the level of access she had. Access not granted lightly. In revealing the depth of that bond, she was not only sharing about herself, but also exposing how Michael managed to maintain emotional anchors in a world that so often sought to commodify him. One of the most profound effects of her revelation was its ability to humanize a figure who had, for much of his life, been treated as an almost mythical entity. Michael's talent and eccentricities had made him seem to many larger than life. Yet, Diana's words pulled him back to earth, not by diminishing his artistry, but by showing the very human dimensions of his relationships. This shift from spectacle to sincerity allowed audiences to see the man beneath the crown, someone capable of deep emotional bonds, reliant on certain people for stability and reassurance. The public reaction also spoke volumes about the hunger for authenticity in an age of carefully curated celebrity images. When Diana spoke, it wasn't wrapped in the language of publicists or filtered through media intermediaries. The simplicity of her delivery was its strength. It suggested that some stories, when told plainly, have more power than any dramatic retelling could. This purity gave her revelation a different texture from the scandal-driven narratives that so often dominate conversations about public figures. For those who study the psychology of fame, her disclosure offered a rare case study in the long-term effects of celebrity intimacy. In most high-profile relationships, there is a point where the demands of public image intrude on the personal connection, reshaping it into something more performative. What Diana described was a relationship that had resisted that erosion, maintaining its authenticity even as both parties navigated lives of extraordinary visibility. This preservation of real connection within an artificial environment is a feat in itself, and it spoke to the strength of their mutual understanding. From a cultural perspective, her statement was also a reminder of how Black artistry has been sustained across generations by relationships of mentorship and mutual respect. The entertainment industry has often celebrated individual achievement while overlooking the networks of support that make such success possible. By acknowledging her role in Michael's life, Diana implicitly highlighted the ways in which Black artists have historically relied on one another for both professional advancement and personal grounding, especially in eras when mainstream platforms offered limited protection. Her truth also invited a reassessment of Michael's creative output. Fans began to comb through lyrics, interviews, and performances, searching for moments that might now be interpreted differently. A gesture on stage, a line in a song, an unguarded expression during an award show, suddenly these became charged with new significance. This retroactive reinterpretation is not uncommon when a new piece of information enters the historical record, but in this case, it felt particularly poignant because it came from someone whose influence was woven into Michael's personal and artistic life. One of the more subtle but impactful elements of her revelation was the light it shed on the balance between public myth and personal reality. Michael Jackson's life had long been dissected through the lens of media narratives, which often oscillated between idolization and criticism. Diana's account disrupted that cycle by offering a perspective grounded in lived experience rather than speculation. This was not an outsider interpreting his actions, it was an insider providing context that only proximity could yield. In doing so, she also challenged the audience to reconsider their own relationship to celebrity. The tendency to flatten public figures into symbols, whether of genius, controversy, or tragedy, often comes at the cost of acknowledging their complexity. Diana's words restored some of that complexity, reminding listeners that even those elevated to cultural icons live lives filled with the same need for connection, understanding, and emotional refuge as anyone else. Her willingness to speak at this stage in her life also carried a sense of responsibility. It suggested that she recognized the fragility of collective memory and the risk of letting important truths fade away unrecorded. There is an urgency to late-in-life disclosures. They are, in many ways, an act of stewardship, ensuring that future generations inherit a more complete version of the past. In sharing her truth, Diana was not only telling her own story, but safeguarding a vital chapter of Michael's. This safeguarding was especially significant given how contested Michael's legacy has been in public discourse. Every revelation about him tends to provoke intense reactions, with interpretations divided along lines of admiration, skepticism, and moral judgment. Yet Diana's statement seemed to transcend those divisions, largely because it was delivered without agenda. It was not a defense, nor was it an indictment. It was a memory placed into the public record, leaving interpretation to those who received it. The fact that her revelation was not accompanied by fanfare or promotion added to its impact. It was not a publicity move, nor an attempt to capitalize on renewed interest in Michael's life. This absence of ulterior motive made it feel like a rare gift, something shared for its own sake, rather than as a means to an end. In an industry where almost every action can be traced back to strategic calculation, such moments of unfiltered sincerity are exceedingly rare. For those who had followed Diana Ross's career closely, the revelation also illuminated her own personal narrative in new ways. It added depth to her image, showing not only the mentor and icon, but the confidant and friend who had carried another's truth for years. It reframed her as someone whose influence extended beyond artistic inspiration into the realm of emotional sustenance. That kind of role is often invisible, yet it can be as transformative as any professional collaboration. The resonance of her statement also extended to the broader conversation about how we remember artists once they are gone. Too often, the narratives that survive are those shaped by controversy or commercial success, while the quieter, more human stories disappear. By adding her voice to the historical record, Diana ensured that a piece of Michael's humanity would endure alongside the more widely known chapters of his life. Her act of speaking also offered a subtle lesson about the stewardship of memory. Not all truths need to be told immediately, and not all silences are acts of avoidance. Sometimes, as in Diana's case, silence can be a form of care, holding a truth until it can be received without distortion. This approach contrasts sharply with the current climate, where immediate disclosure is often prioritized over thoughtful timing. In waiting, the story she shared will likely inspire future examinations of both her and Michael's lives, prompting new scholarship, documentaries, and personal reflections from others who knew them. It may also encourage other artists to share their own long-guarded truths, recognizing that such revelations can add richness and nuance to the legacies of those they concern. The significance of Diana Ross's revelation lies not just in the content of what she said, but in the act of saying it. She broke a silence that had lasted decades, not to sensationalize, but to honor. She stepped into a vulnerable space, offering the world a more complete picture of someone who had meant so much to her. In doing so, she bridged the gap between the myth and the man, reminding everyone that even the brightest stars live within the constellations of their relationships. That reminder may be her most enduring gift to Michael's memory. It invites us to see him not only as an extraordinary artist, but as a person whose life was deeply shaped by the people who loved him. And it invites us, too, to reconsider the value of the truths we carry, the ones that, when finally shared, can change the way the world remembers someone forever. One aspect that made Diana Ross's decision so remarkable was how it reframed the dynamics of legacy within the entertainment industry. Legacies are often constructed posthumously by biographers, critics, and fans, piecing together fragments from public records and speculative accounts. Rarely do they gain such a direct infusion of authenticity from someone who lived the story firsthand. Her decision to share, especially after so many years of silence, became a defining act of authorship over a shared history. It shifted control from outsiders back to one of the central figures, allowing her to set the tone and context rather than letting it be defined by rumor. This act also exposed the quiet responsibility that comes with having witnessed a life so closely. Diana's connection to Michael was not just about friendship or mentorship, it placed her in a unique position as a custodian of moments no one else saw. There is a weight to holding that kind of knowledge. It is not simply a matter of choosing whether to speak. It is about recognizing when the telling of a story adds value to the memory of the person at its center. Her timing reflected both sensitivity and foresight, revealing a truth when it could stand as a piece of history rather than an element of controversy. By speaking from her own vantage point, she also demonstrated how personal testimony can reshape the emotional geography of public memory. When audiences think about Michael Jackson, they often imagine vast arenas, choreographed perfection, and meticulously produced music videos. Diana's insight pulled focus toward a quieter, more intimate setting, a space where fame was not the dominant language and where the connection between two people existed outside the machinery of celebrity. This change in focus allowed fans to visualize Michael in a way that felt accessible, relatable, and unfiltered by performance. Her choice of words carried an unspoken acknowledgement of the barriers Michael faced in his life. Without making explicit statements about challenges or hardships, her tone conveyed the sense that she had understood the pressures on him in a way only a handful of people could. In doing so, she didn't just reveal a fact about their relationship. She revealed the care and comprehension that had sustained it. That perhaps is why her truth resonated beyond its immediate content, because it gave listeners a sense of the emotional intelligence that exists in truly profound connections. It also raised broader questions about how we understand public figures when the bulk of their narrative is curated by commercial interests. The music industry thrives on mythology, building personas that are compelling but often incomplete. Diana's revelation chipped away at that structure, showing that reality is often more intricate than the carefully presented image. This made her words not just a personal confession, but a commentary on the nature of stardom itself. There is also a cultural significance to a truth told late in life. When an elder in any community chooses to share a guarded piece of the past, it becomes more than a statement. It becomes an inheritance. In Diana's case, the inheritance she passed on was not only about Michael Jackson, but about the ethos of loyalty, discretion, and compassion that defined their bond. It suggested that some relationships, even when lived under the relentless scrutiny of fame, can be preserved in their essence across decades. Her revelation now sits as a fixed point in the timeline of both their lives. It is not overshadowed by the noise of promotion or the chaos of headlines, but instead stands on its own as a moment of clarity. This singular act will continue to ripple outward, influencing how future generations encounter their legacies. And as time moves on, the fact that it came directly from Diana, measured, intentional, and deeply human, will ensure that it retains its potency, not as an embellishment of history, but as a truth that finally found its voice. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on Diana Ross's truth about Michael Jackson? What will happen? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.